Hello and welcome to episode 25 of The Dive. That is 1/4 of the way to 100.
That was his weakest number yet, and this one rhymes too, but he's just not in it this morning.
But we're all grown up. 25 episodes, not bad.
Nice. We are going to be talking about, the new patch that came out, a lot of the world's play-in stuff as well.
Yeah, and we also want to look forward to the best of fives that are going to be coming up tomorrow, I guess, and doing some previewing and predictions on those.
Yeah, so I've also been told that we should introduce ourselves at the top of the show. So I'm Jat, that is Kobe, that is
Azael.
Done.
That's true.
Perfect. We actually have forgotten to do that on a number of occasions. But it is Worlds. This is Wednesday morning, essentially, when we're filming this. Tonight in Pacific time is when the bracket stage will start happening for the play-ins. But we've already seen all of the group stages. So really just what stood out to you guys from the emerging regions as well as some of the major regions that were in the play-in groups?
I mean, there's a number of things that stood out to me personally. I think I'm looking at who looked worse than I thought they would look, who looked better than I thought they would look. To me, if you're talking about the emerging region teams that were most impressive, I'm looking at Fenerbache and Lyon. I think that both those two teams really did look like solid teams. And Fnatic, even though they got first in their group, they actually looked pretty bad to me compared to where I was expecting them, because I felt like they had one of the weaker groups and they still didn't look that good. And then HKA, I think everyone's going to point to as that was the team that, coming into this when we talked about it before, that was one of the areas where you could see an upset, and it did happen. They did not look nearly as strong as some people were kind of hyping up.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like any team, maybe except Cloud9, came out and really blasted. Like Cloud9 and WE, I think everybody's very confident in them, because Cloud9, the game times even that they were posting, everybody was definitely very enthused and on this North American hype train. And Jat's immediately like, "Whoa, everybody, calm down."
Yeah, exactly. Here's my excuse for how you should calm down about Cloud9, so we do not overhype them. I compare WE and Cloud9 as the two teams from major regions that looked the best in the group stage. And Cloud9's games were definitely way faster than WE. And in a lot of ways, they looked a lot cleaner. But WE was picking these hard scaling late game team fight compositions. And C9 was picking the LeBlanc, Rek'Sai, Snowball comps. And then they did have that one Rise Sejuani game against Team 1 where they had this incredibly close 2v2 at the start of the game and then snowballed from there. So yes, their games were faster than WE, but they were picking comps that were supposed to win faster. So I agree, they were the best looking team of the play-in stage, but there are some reasons that they looked better because they were picking win fast comps.
Go ahead.
I still don't think that does detract much from it, because those are harder to execute, right? We keep on always talking about this meta of you have to have a tank, you have to build your Ardent Sensor, and you have to go for these 5-on-5 team fighting compositions. But showing that you can still have a valid strategy of snowballing early and winning like that definitely is promising for this Worlds, because we don't want it to just devolve into those late game team fight, protect the AD carry
Race
stuff.
To the sensor, baby.
We still want long Zhu strategy to be viable and top lane carries and stuff like that. So hopefully there is still some variation we can get.
And this is the kind of style that it's not like I think they weren't playing down to their opponents. This is kind of the play style they'd like to play.
They were just playing the way they wanted to play.
Exactly, and I think that's what you want to see. You want to see the major region teams, these teams that are supposed to be stronger, kind of impose their will on their opponents. And I thought that Cloud9 did that the best by far. I didn't think that WE was actually anywhere close to as impressive. And after talking to Frost and after talking to some people, they were saying, well, WE is maybe actually the best Chinese team coming into this event. I was left very underwhelmed actually with how close their series were against Lyon. And I did think Lyon performed well, right?
Yep.
And I'm not trying to take anything away from them. I think that Lyon was a harder opponent than either of the opponents in C9's group. So that's something that you also kind of have to keep in mind, because C9 was playing against Team 1, the Brazilian representative, as well as the Direwolves, the Oceanic representative. They didn't look as good to me, but still, WE's games against Lyon, they looked like they could lose actually both of those games. And they were, within one team fight from losing both of those games.
Yeah, let's actually jump into the knockout stage, and then we'll kind of use that as a way to talk about the play-in groups, because Cloud9 versus Lyon is the first best of 5 that we have. I think Lyon has looked pretty good, but I still have Cloud9 as pretty heavy favorites here. If I recall correctly, Lyon was the team that just missed out on going to MSI against Gigabyte Marines. I'll have to double check on that one. But so they have kind of been in these situations before, but it's still C9, right? And they were playing their game during group stage, so I think they're pretty strong favorites.
Yeah, and I really enjoy watching Lyon play also because a lot of these players have played on the North American server for a super long time. Especially Sia, he's actually played in NA almost since beta, and we see him like all the time. So it's not like these are as individual players super unfamiliar opponents to Cloud9. Whereas versus like Direwolves and stuff, they kept on, it turned into a huge meme and stuff. But at the beginning, they actually had no idea who those guys were or what to expect or anything. I'm actually pretty excited for this matchup because now both teams are gonna know.
I mean, this
a
one's
lot more.
still a huge meme. I mean, Jensen's tweeting out, "I'm playing against the guy named White Lettuce," and so he's definitely having some fun with it. And you can afford, you can get away with it a little bit when you're smashing the teams in 25 minutes, right? But it always comes back to bite you if you do actually end up losing, and that's just like the clap thing with Faker, right?
Yeah.
But I actually think that Cloud9 got the hardest second seed out of all the groups. I think that the Lion actually looked even better than HKA to me. HKA I don't think looked very good at all. But we'll have to see. Like, they did put up a good fight against WE in both the games. I think that Cloud9 looked better than WE, but I also think that they had easier opponents. And while I do think this is certainly Cloud9 favorite, and if they play as well as they did in group stage, they should win this comfortably. I think that Lion could take games off them, and I think that if C9 shows like a poor performance, they could lose, right? And this is not a C9 that has been super consistent all year long. You hope that the form that they showed against One and Direwolves is the form that they actually will show here. But I do think that there are ways in for Lion, and I think that White Lotus actually played very, very well in the group stage. He particularly impressed me. I think that he's actually like a very strong player.
So just want to correct, Lyon was in Gigabyte Marines group at MSI. They were the second place in that group, so they weren't super close to going. As far as them, I think Sia, specifically in those games against WE, or Sia against Xie, did really well in those Lyon versus WE games, the mid laner for Lyon. But the strength there matched up against where C9 is strong with Jensen and the way they play around that mid lane is just a bit of a mismatch. So I think it's going to be really hard for White Lotus to then kind of carry through everything that C9 has to offer, even though they have been a pretty strong team.
I mean, my big concern for a Lion wasn't even their laning or anything. It's their macro play, right? Like the first game that they lost against WE, their carries at one point, their mid laner and their AD carry combined were something like 12-0-15, I believe, at one point in the game. And they're still losing because WE just played the map better than them, right? And that's one of the things that I think stood out kind of like a sore thumb as far as like if you're asking, well, what's the gap? Like, what is the difference between the major region teams and the minor region teams? I think it was still macro play, and especially play around Baron, because I think some of these teams were like actually atrocious around Baron. There's so many Baron throws.
And it was specifically WE taking initiative for all the objectives. It wasn't like, so when you're talking about, macro play, not that good, like there's a lot of areas of macro play.
Ambiguous,
Right, yeah. I think that the thing to me for them was that they always were kind of waiting for something to happen, or maybe they weren't even waiting for something to happen, but they didn't really have a plan of how to progress the game, how to progress the game in the direction that they wanted. And so it was almost always WE start up an objective, Lion come, and then they get a bunch of kills, or they get some kills, at most of those interactions. But like you're saying, WE would always either have an objective down first or get an objective afterwards. And a lot of that has to do with in-game planning,
Side lane
and
control.
Exactly, and it is a lot of that, planning and teamwork that does come in. So I definitely agree there. The other thing that I was gonna say about White Lotus and Lion, some of Lion's strengths, was that in one of the games here for Cloud9, where they actually struggled in the early game, it was when Contracts was spending pretty much the entire early game in the top triangle of the map, and not going bottom. So, Sneaky and Smoothie everyone's like, oh, they just got camped. Yeah, but they got camped very effectively. and the bottom lane was definitely a worry in that game for Cloud9 early on. They did end up turning it around very quickly and still winning in 30 minutes. But you have to keep your eyes on those types of openings because even though people may be over hyping up the bot lane meta and that they're saying that's the only thing that matters, there are definitely other things that do matter, but it's super significant right now. And I think we're really going to have to pay attention to where Contract spends his time.
Yep.
Especially since he's playing these aggressive junglers, which have to succeed pretty early on in the game.
Yeah, and I do think that this is a pretty good game state for C9 as far as the meta is concerned. C9 is generally okay with giving Contracts a really large amount of farm on the carry junglers like his Rek'Sai or his Nidalee, which I think have been really effective. Impact is one of the best tank players, right? Even though he didn't have a good regular season. And then they just Jensen in a carry plus whatever they want Ardent Sensor. It fits all of the players very well right now.
I just wanted to do a small interjection for Nidalee. You don't have to give her farm. She takes early game farm herself. It's not like Cloud9 are like, yeah, Contracts, go ahead and farm up. She's like, boom, jungle is cleared. Nice.
Yeah. And I mean, Galio top, anytime Galio top is doing well, I'm just like, holy crap, that's such a good champion for Impact.
Yeah.
Because not only is it something where he can survive on an island his own, has big team fight impact, and when you already have Smoothie and Contracts always in Jensen's lane, now you have another person who can roam down and very easily join that. So that puts on even more pressure to kind of the style that they like to play, especially when you're talking about if Contracts on an aggressive jungler, you have Galio who can back you up, you have Galio who can roam to mid lane. I think that sort of champion is perfect for Cloud9.
Or flex to mid lane.
Predictions.
Ooh.
They did play Galio mid as well. 3.
I'm going to go Cloud9. I'm going to go 3-1.
Yeah, I think they could drop a game as well. I mean,
They could.
I think that
They
I'm
could
gonna
drop 2
guess.
games.
I'm gonna guess 3-1. I think that Cloud9 would have to significantly underperform to lose, but I do think that if Lyon shows up, they have their best day, and Cloud9 does not, they could still win. I mean, White Lotus did kind of impress me, and I do think if you want to talk about 80 carry meta, he smashed a lot of his games, and he played a different champion in each of his group stage games. 10-0-2 on Kalista, 5-0-5 on Tristana, 8-1-7 on Kog'Maw. Pretty good score lines.
Big KDAs, man.
Yep.
3-0.
KDA players.
I feel like
Going in. 3-0. Yeah, that's okay. Everyone favors Cloud9. Next matchup is Fnatic versus HKA. So, Kobe, I remember this or that slide that said, will an emerging region make it out of whatever? Will they make it through? The answer is yes,
The
because
answer
the
is
two
yes.
major regions are playing each other right here between Fnatic and Hong Kong Attitude. Essentially, what's interesting here is these are the two major regions that underperformed. So this is the good way, in my opinion, of the major regions going up against each other, because I was worried that one of the major regions would underperform and then just get mashed up against someone who was playing super well in the group stage, and then they essentially get punished. But to me, the fact that Fnatic lost that game to Young Generation, even though they didn't need it to be first in the group, and had a very close first game against Young Generation,
They should have lost both.
means that they're in the position where I think they are of the two struggling major regions, and they're playing up against each other here, Fnatic versus HK.
I mean, the Fnatic team members are even kind of tweeting out similar things, right? They're not a supremely confident team right now. They're very well aware of a lot of the issues that they're trying to work through, and even though they have veterans on the team, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a super quick fix for them. So I am also very excited for this matchup. Because you're talking about kind of the levels of them coming in. I still think this one's going to be Fnatic favored because Hong Kong Attitude as well is kind of a similar thing to the Lyon one, but their late game has also looked a little bit kind of laggy, I guess is kind of a term for what we're
This
seeing.
team is actually so bad around Baron. It was unbelievable. they're
Unbelievable.
It was
bet.
unbelievable. It was
Yeah,
actually
lag.
they were actually blowing my mind with how bad they were around Baron. I don't even understand what they were doing around Baron in so many of their games. It just felt like they have no idea what to do when it gets to the later stages of the game, even though they seem like, for the most part, you're watching them and they feel kind of like a better team, HKA, when they're playing against Fenerbahce, but it's like they're just drawn to the Baron.
The early game was great. They were winning these early games, getting a
Yeah.
bunch of goal leads.
But they gave up so many Baron steals, it felt like. And they never seemed to have control around the Baron. either side when they're playing. It never felt like they're zoning out the other jungler. They're just going for 50-50s nonstop. I felt like they showed a lot of weakness, but
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's one of the things why I'm favoring Fnatic, where Fnatic in the past have also been able to kind of prey on teams that are feeling unstable in the late game.
Mm,
Ever since the
mhm.
inception of this team, Fnatic, they were one of the first ones doing double teleports and 1-3-1s and stuff. They can
Yeah.
they have Soaz and Reckless still, so like they can pressure the map effectively late game, I think, and in a best of 5. I feel like they're gonna have the time to work out the kinks and work out the strategy here to probably take this.
Yeah, because as much as Fnatic has been struggling, their team play is really good. And that's going to shine through against HKA because I look at Hong Kong Attitude and we've, I think, fairly well documented the fact that they are mostly a team made up of high elo solo queue players. So they're trying to like snowball the lanes and then be like, yep, we're really far ahead, so now we win. And that shows with their really bad objective control. But Fnatic is a team that has been playing very well together against a wide variety of opponents. And like, yes, they do lose against the, bigger opponents that they've had to play against when they choked up against Misfits or when they lost to Rift Rivals. But this Hong Kong Attitude team, I don't think has the cohesion to work against Fnatic. Even if Fnatic picks losing lanes, I think they'll make good teleport plays bottom lane. Like they'll find ways to orchestrate wins in a high pressure situation is just the way I see it.
I think the way that HK could win, and I maybe think this is a bit closer than you guys, is if they can actually smash those lanes, right? Because we did see some weakness from Fnatic against Young Generation, who and some of the other teams in their group, which like they didn't look very impressive in the laning phase. I mean, when you think about the game that they lost against YG, Reckless and Jezz got pretty much slammed in bot lane. By like this kind of double range matchup. Palette, who was playing Lulu, went Spell Thief, so I thought it was pretty clever. They went super aggressive. They actually like slammed them when they picked Braum, and that's something that Fnatic has kind of been known to do, sometimes playing these melee supports. So I do think there are some weaknesses there. Caps also struggled really hard in lane in their other YG game,
Yeah.
I believe it was. He got slammed on
I believe
the block.
he gets a new name when he has a bad game there as well.
Oh
Yeah, Baby Faker, right? That's the one.
Yeah.
It's like a literal baby playing the game as Faker. He doesn't know where his
Oh,
buttons
I
are.
get it now.
Yeah, that's how it's supposed to work.
But Fnatic should have probably lost both their games to YG. Like when we talk about the other one, it was one play away, and it was even less than that. It was like one cask away from losing. Reckless had no flash, no heal on Varus. The mid hit was already down for Fnatic. He gets TP flanked by a Gragas, body slam flash, and then just fails the barrel, right? And just knocks him away and then kills himself, and then they lose. But like I actually did feel like there's ways. So both these games, someone got slammed in lane for Fnatic. So
Right.
when you think about HK, to me, their strength is a lot in the bot lane. I think that Unified played very well. And maybe they can, if you can slam bot lane, you can actually snowball the game and win that way.
And I think something that's going to be pretty important for us to try and figure out, since we have these small groups of 3 teams from different regions, is how good is Young Generation, or how good were they? Because they're the number 2 seed from the GPL, essentially Vietnam, right behind Gigabyte Marines. But they got slammed by the Marines in the final. So, like, are they just a little bit below them? Because we know Gigabyte Marines is capable of taking games off of major regions? Or are they just like this team that, if they hadn't changed the rules a little bit, wouldn't even be in this tournament because they're the number 2 seed from Vietnam? Like, was it Fnatic losing to just a bunch of randoms, or was it them losing to like one of the strongest emerging regions, just the second best team in there?
So I think that while it is like Vietnam is becoming very strong very quickly because the player base is big. They're obviously very passionate. There's a lot of kind of development in that region, and it's happening very quickly. And we have seen that with Gigabyte Marines. But I think that there's a big gap between Gigabyte Marines and the rest of that league still. And I do think that this is not a Gigabyte Marines quality team. I did think that YG looked a good step below them. They're kind of a tier below. So that to me was why it was concerning that Fnatic was struggling with them. Because when you look at some of the decisions that are being made, it didn't feel like when Fnatic was struggling, the other team was necessarily playing super clean. They're just able to make mistakes and still come away with advantages or still stay close in the game.
Yeah, like if you remember the Reckless deaths, we'll talk about the game you talked about. There was the Caps one where they struggled, and then there was the second one where they actually lost. The first death for Reckless and Jez's was a 2v2 that they initiated. They
Mhm.
try and go all in with the Braum Tristana.
Mhm.
They're not able to get the last hit for the Braum passive to get the stun. It gets turned around on them in this big minion wave, and they get the first kill on Reckless. That is an unforced error, basically, we talk about in tennis or something, one of my favorite terms. Second one is another unforced error where Reckless wants to push out another wave in the lane, and the bottom lane is still there, right? They're hiding in the bush. They jump on Reckless. They get another kill for him. So now he's 0-2. And both of those, like that start going down 0-2 in an AD carry meta,
Yeah.
or whatever, those did happen, from kind of Fnatic mistakes, kind of to back up your point there with some examples.
So what's the prediction then?
I actually think HK could win.
All
I'm
right.
gonna say 3-2 HK. I had very little faith in their late game, but I had so little faith in Fnatic's early game from what they showed that I think if these two teams show the same level, I think HK can just win early game and win the game off that, even though they really did seem to struggle around Baron. Because Fnatic looked really, really vulnerable. They super unimpressed me.
What do you think, Chad?
I thought you were going to go next. I am not super confident in Fnatic, but I am even less confident in
You guys are
HKA.
just ray of sunshine over here.
rays of sunshine.
He's extra unimpressed. Chad is.
Well, we said these are the two major regions teams that struggled the most in the group stage. So there's a reason that they're both underhyped coming into this. I think they will definitely lose some games because they get smashed in lane. Like, it's happened enough to this team, whether it was up against Misfits in the playoffs or whether it was against Young Generation, that they'll have those times when they fall behind. I just don't think it'll happen 3 times in 5 games. So I think they're going to win like 3-2 or 3-1.
2 predictions here from the man.
3-2 Fnatic victory.
Yeah, I was also gonna go 3-2 just because while I do think Fnatic definitely has the edge in this one, I think, like I said, they'll be able to work out. All right, we need to have 1-3-1 or whatever, or we need to pressure the side lanes. There's definitely some games where even if they're like, yes, I know what we can do, they're already like 5,000 gold behind or something, and they're not going to be able to pull it off or not be able to come back. So that's why this is probably the most exciting one, because this is a very close, probably the closest, honestly, for me, of these matchups.
The other thing that really does come into play, which I don't have a lot of experience with Hong Kong Attitude and their coaching, so I don't know how good their preparation is going to be, but you would give Fnatic the benefit of the doubt that they will prepare well for this best of 5. How well will HKA prepare? I don't know.
They should prepare well. Tabe is very experienced coach, and he has his own methods of what he thinks coaching of a team should be, but I imagine they're going to prepare relatively well.
So I mean, that's what I think is kind of the wrench in the gears is Fnatic, maybe can like really prepare well and draft around the way that these guys play. And if they can play a more steady early game, I think that would be their way to win. But either way, it'll be exciting.
Fenerbahce 1907 versus Team 1 from Brazil. So Brazil versus Turkey. The guaranteed emerging region in World's group stage.
Can I just say, I feel like Fenerbahce are so happy. Like, Fenerbahce, they not only were they able to actually win, right, and get
number 1 in their group,
exactly, get this first seed or whatever to move on, but Team 1, especially at the beginning of this tournament, they were struggling. Like, a lot of the early time records were set against Team 1, for this tournament. And so Fenerbahce, they're like, oh yeah, they were not predicted to finish first seed. Not only do they finish out first seed, but then they also draw what's probably the weakest looking opponent heading into this group stage for the tournament. So I actually think Fenerbahce is set up pretty well to make it all the way to Worlds main Worlds group stage. Yeah,
I would agree. I do think that I would be really surprised if Team 1 were to win. The one thing that is kind of interesting is I did see some stuff on Twitter from a lot of the Brazilian fans and Brazilian analysts and some of the people from CB Law talking about how they felt like the team was massively underperforming to what their level was, and fans were pissed, right? Fans were really mad that this is the level they're showing because they felt that the CBLOL is at a much higher level than what was being shown in this group stage. They felt that this is a team that should be able to compete with the major regions. From what I saw in play-in, admittedly, I have not watched much CBLOL this year. You know, mostly my opinion is just based on play-in. In play-in, I wouldn't give them a chance against Fenerbahce, right? But if this is a team that maybe they're jet lagged, maybe they're not used to traveling, right? This is a team that is not always
Very new.
qualifying, right? They're
Extremely.
very, very
Yeah.
new. So maybe this experience has kind of allowed them to be a bit more comfortable and play their play style. And if they can actually, you know, show a higher level, then that could be something that could really throw off predictions because maybe this team is a lot better than what they've shown. But from what we saw, I'm with you, Kobe. It's like C9 was speedrunning these guys. They beat them in 22 minutes, right?
Yeah, and even when Team One had an advantage on C9, they lost in like 26 minutes. So
Yeah.
they still managed to lose the game. But this is a CBLOL team that has essentially been counted out a ton of different times. Like, it was a challenger team in Split 1. Then they made it to the CBLOL in Split 2, won the whole thing, and now they're going to Worlds. Like, that's how quick the ascent was for them. And I do actually hear this almost every year from the CBLOL fans where it's like, I believe it was INTZ that was just like, man, they choke every single time. We don't want them to go to Worlds anymore. Then they finally had
Red
like,
Cannons.
yeah. And then there's pretty much any team from the CBLOL that would go to an international stage. They'd be like, man, they choked. Reminds me a little bit of how we talk about NA teams sometimes, but I can sympathize with the sentiment. This is a team, especially when subbing out their mid laner. I can see a world where they do find that energy that they had in the playoffs because they are a team that is used to being counted out. And like, this is another game where they theoretically have a chance. Like Fenerbahce 1907 isn't this behemoth of a team that no one can take down, but I would say they are favored.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about it is I saw a comment in the Reddit thread talking about their group draws, and it's basically Team One is cheering, yeah, we got Fenerbahce, and Fenerbahce is cheering, yeah, we got Team One.
It's a
like,
dream draw for both teams.
Exactly, right? And it's funny to think about it like that, but no one would rather play another team, right? So even if Team One is supposed to be the underdogs, they're much less of an underdog against Fenerbahce than they would be against any other team, right? Like, no one would be giving them a chance if they're going up against WE at all. So I think that is kind of exciting for them, and it does give them a realistic shot at really pleasing their region, at making it to a group stage. Could be pretty exciting.
Yeah, it could be. Because I was also, going back, reviewing the Fenerbahce games. And as much as people were getting hyped up for Padden and like, oh my God, he got a pentakill. And oh, look at him. In the late game, he's carrying team fights and his positioning, people always will cite. I was still not impressed with Padden. I could not get past the early games where he is coming out of lane, 80 CS down or something. He gets hit with like every skill shot for the first 20 minutes of every game or something. And
I mean, to be fair, it was the tiebreaker game was by far the worst for the laning phase. The rest of the games
when it mattered most, to be fair.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
but it wasn't like he got slammed that bad every game. But I agree. The tiebreaker game was essentially a blooper reel nonstop. How many hooks can he get hit with? Turns out a lot.
Varus ultimates were coming through. It seemed like every time he shot one off, Padden was the one getting hit. And I was like, oh my goodness. Like, if this is gonna be a best of 5 to make it to Worlds, right? So we start thinking about high pressure situations, and these do kind of change the way that games are played out.
You know what his average CSD at 10 is, Kobe?
Hit me with some stats, Jack.
Guess the average across his 5 games.
-20.
Close. -17.2. The next worst AD carry is Mystic at -8.
Wow.
The -40 game hurts that a little bit
See, he's
more.
in a good crowd then. He's
He was,
right there with
negative
Mystic.
46 or something in that last game.
That's what I was gonna say. It was definitely dragged down a lot by that game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they won.
But they won the game.
But they won. He still got 6 items.
And that's the other
He
thing.
was
like,
deferring farm. He was
Exactly.
later in the game,
Earlier power spike, level 6 for a support.
he ended up ahead in CS because the team
He was up
like,
100 CS by the end, something like that.
Yeah.
Relax there, Azael. The team was specifically feeding him open lanes of farm. Anyways, though, that is kind of, if we're looking at openings for Team One here to try and get in there, that's definitely one of them. I think that Frozen is going to be definitely difficult for them to get around, especially because even with subbing out the mid laner, I feel like that's going to be difficult for Team One to work around. And as much as everyone's like, oh yeah, it's all about your Ardent Sensor AD carry, mid lane is still extremely powerful in determining the way that these games are going in the current meta.
And while Patton was getting slammed, it was Frozen who was actually buying time for him to be able to farm up and get those items because he was disgustingly behind. He was actually insanely behind. It was like 2 items to 1 item. He was thousands and thousands of gold behind in the earlier stages of the game. And yes, HK should have been able to snowball that if they were a better team, but Frozen made some really good plays, I felt, especially in the Echo game, to actually slow things down, to turn around team fights, and to create pressure in side lanes. He actually showed, I think, a pretty high mastery of side lane control. Playing double TP. They were able to buy a lot of time for this Tristana, who was 50 CS behind at 10 minutes or whatever, to be able to actually farm up and make something happen. But I do think it's a good point that one could maybe try to craft their strategy around the bot lane, right? If you can draft a really aggressive early jungle, if you can draft something like a Thresh and I don't know, some sort of really aggressive ADC, I don't know if they play Draven and that sort of things, but we've even seen those show up. If you can slam that lane, maybe that's a way to win.
Play some Galio mid.
There you go.
You get to get him down
Shen
there.
top, 5-man bot. Let's go.
Okay, relax.
All right. So 3-1 Fenerbahce. Is that what we're agreeing on?
I actually hadn't thought about game score, but I would go 3-1, I guess. Actually, I would. This would be my bold or the strongest one. I would probably go 3-0. Actually, with the current state as you're talking about, if Team One were jet lagged or they're trying to show their true form here, then maybe they do better.
Right.
But
yeah,
haven't seen it yet.
I'm
More
okay
confident.
with the 3-1.
Yeah, you're more confident in 1907 Fenerbahce than Cloud9, Kobe.
Yeah, versus Lyon. Yeah. I think I am.
Just double checking. Final matchup: Team WE versus Young Generation. I'm not sure if you got to see the reaction video of Young Generation after they drew Team WE. They were not happy
I
about
believe
it.
the quote was, "It's done."
Yeah.
One of them was yelling as he held his head.
Yeah. Oh
It's
no,
done.
we're playing China.
It is done.
I can kind of sympathize. Like a lot of times, based on seeing a reaction like that, you want to write the team off because, like, hey, no one's going to know better than the team. You'd think of whether or not they can win or lose. But also, in the same way that Fenerbahce and Team One were happy that they drew each other, like WE was one of the worst possible draws for this team, so they could also be upset in that regard.
To be fair, WE is the worst possible draw probably for every team.
You think worse than Cloud9 based on their performance in playing?
If you isolated playing, I would say no, but it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's fair. I think that either way, I mean, everyone's going to have WE as a favorite here, right? Despite the fact that they didn't look as good as people were hoping, perhaps, especially as fans of the LPL were hoping for them to look. I think that the teams that they had their troubles against, they had a bit of trouble against Lyon, right? And Lyon, I think, looked a lot better than Young Generation did. So even though they had some trouble there, they still won all their games.
And that's the thing. Showing a faulty early game, I think is completely fine for any team, any of the top teams. Right? We talk about it's bigger than just playing games. It's how much confidence you have in the actual players and seeing them play through early game deficits. It's not like the better team always gets an early game lead.
Right. Like
there
the
are a
jungler
lot.
always takes the right path, and you never get surprised by a gank.
You have 2v2 skirmishes sometimes that end up with someone having 30 HP at the end or whatever, and that makes the big difference, and something like that snowballs. Being able to recover actually from faulty early games, I think, is very important and a pretty good sign and worthy of confidence as well. There definitely were mistakes, and WE. I'm not saying they looked stupendous or whatever in the openings here, but I don't think it really shook my confidence in the team that much.
Well, I'd also say, just with your point, that I don't think that there's actually a big difference between the laning phase of the best players from the emerging regions and a lot of the other teams, right? Like, there's not actually that big of a difference. That's not why these teams are worse, in my opinion. Similarly, I think that there's lots of players that can lane up against the players of SKT, right? But it doesn't mean you're going to win the game. because
Right.
the teams have a lot more than that going on, and the game has a lot more than that going on. So I do agree, and I think that's actually a really good point.
Yeah.
But that being said, even just in some of the team fighting and everything, like watching this, Mystic is one of the guys who actually impressed me the most coming out of the LPL.
In review,
and
yeah.
and every time I've watched them at MSI during the regular season and playoffs, I think a Mystic usually looks really, really good. I know he was quite high up on the top 20 players at Worlds, as we were joking after I was
top 20.
after I was flaming him. But he did not look good, right? You talk about he had the second worst CSD, going up against emerging region teams. His actual team fighting, it looked like he had a lot of jitters. There was like fat fingers on flash. There was a lot of mispositioning. This team, for whatever reason, did not look as good, whether you want to say that's the pressure of playing at home, whether it's just an off week, whatever you want to say it is, they did not look nearly as good, I think, as they had in the past. And this team has no excuse. They're playing at home. There's no jet lag. There's no travel. This is like, same routine that you're used to.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Like, my confidence isn't shaken that much for Team WE. Yes, if we looked at the play-ins in a vacuum, you'd be like, damn, this team is super overrated, and there's no way that they're going to do anything in group stage, even if they make it through. But like, it's so much bigger than that, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm willing to say that they were slow starters. Maybe they were trying to play overly safe against the play-in teams, right? It depends how you strategize for each game. You don't have to go all out and play your full game plan against a team that you think you're far superior to, because at the end of the day, they're still undefeated at the World Championship, and now I think they'll remain undefeated in this series.
Even though I said, my confidence isn't shaking too much in them, I would like to play the other side here and
Say they're overrated.
bring back the memes, just China sandbagging, overrated at Worlds. They have had, as a region, quite a few recent failures.
Well, yeah, because they're always hyped as like this clear number 2 region rather, to Korea.
I don't know if I would.
think it's
I don't think
They're hyped
that it's
as the clear.
always hyped as the clear.
I don't know. I'm trying to think through the past few years.
You-
EDG was super hyped as being good last year. The year before that, it was LGD was hyped to be super good.
Yeah.
The year before that, Royal Club was in the final. The year before that, Royal Club was in the final.
Okay.
Like the last 4 years, they've either been the second best region or hyped as the second best region. And if you look at the long term of it, they have been, but like the difference between them and like the EU or the NA or the LMS is often very small. So like, I still think it's there. It's just not as pronounced as people might be expecting it to be.
Yeah, and to be clear, my shaking confidence does not mean I think they actually have any chance of losing this series.
Yeah.
But what it does affect, and maybe this is disrespectful to their opponents, but I'm assuming that they're already in the group stage, right? Like I don't think that this is going to be a particularly close series. But what it does change is my opinion on how strong they will do when I see their group, right? Because I think that while they were clearly a cut above these teams, if people were talking about them as the best Chinese team, which I actually saw a number of people doing, if you're saying they're the best Chinese team and people have expectations of this region as the clear second best, then you're putting this as like a top 4 team at Worlds, right?
Yeah.
If you're making those claims, and that's not a claim that any of us I think actually made, but it seemed to be a relatively common opinion. So coming into Worlds, I would not say there's any chance in my mind that I would have them as a top 4 team going into group stage for Worlds. And I think that is more what I'm talking about. Like, I would not even be super confident that they would make it out of a lot of those groups anymore. So I think I'm looking forward, but still, my opinion has changed a lot on them through.
Now I just going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but you're making me very curious. What is your number 4 team heading into groups?
And which group would they not make it out of? Because they can only go into the Longzhou Immortals group or the TSM Flash Wolves group. Those are the only 2.
I mean, I think that there's a distinct possibility that they could fail to get out of either of those groups. I don't think that that's unrealistic to say that WE could fail against Immortals when they struggled against Young Generation, or that they could fail against Flash Wolves or TSM, right? I think that they could fail to get out of either of those groups. Who my number 4 team is going into Worlds?
It's a hard choice.
I think it's hard. I think that there is a number of teams, but I'm actually of the opinion that the other LPL teams are stronger than WE. Like, I'd be much more apt to say that someone like EDG could be the number 4. I actually do still think that if TSM performs at their best, I think that they would be at least in the top 5. I think that top 3 is just all Korea, and then I think that
Oh, remember what we talked about? Low
I think that you're the one who asked the question, Kobe. It's your fault.
I can see it in your eyes.
I think that the number 4 is really like there's a grouping of teams that all could be up there because I really do feel as far as tiering, if you want to go into that, it's Korea and it's everybody else.
Hit the table harder.
I don't think.
Agree.
Yeah.
Bam.
Everybody's.
Episode 25.
I think everybody's aligned on that.
Yeah. As far as the LPL is concerned, I also have EDG ranked as the best team in the LPL because they won the LPL. Like it's not this crazy far out opinion that the third place team was the third best team in WE from the region. So I do think they're very close and competitive, but I also have EDG as the numero uno team in there.
Predictions.
Oh, Team WE 3-0.
3-0.
Yeah.
Damn.
That was fast.
That was quick.
Oof.
Okay, good
W-
job.
the
Wait,
greatest.
I changed mine to be an outlier. I'm 3-1. Woo!
Yeah.
So crazy.
Let's touch very quickly on World's meta.
Slow down.
Let's touch very quickly on World's meta because we have now seen play-in teams. Last episode, we kind of talked a lot about this difference between the barrier healing supports or the difference between the hard farming versus tank junglers and how that was going to kind of shake out within the World's meta. What do you guys think we've seen so far, or have you been able to predict what the emerging regions and the third seeds from major regions have been able to do for what we're actually going to see at Worlds in a couple weeks? Because it's going to all be on the same patch.
Overall meta for
Yeah, like just what has surprised you about the World's meta?
Here's
the question.
There's two things. One was the junglers. I was very happy to see that we're seeing a lot more DPS junglers, aggressive early junglers. You know, we even Lee Sin coming out. You know, the Ezreal made an appearance. A lot in Nidalee and stuff like that. So that I think is very interesting to me because I feel like jungle is actually really flexible right now. As long as you are willing to play a tank in a different role, because I still feel like tank is mandatory in this meta. But if you're willing to, or maybe not mandatory, as long as you can have an exception, maybe. If you're willing to play your tank in a different role, it's so much more exciting for me to watch games that are not Sejuani in the jungle and not. Well, I guess they can make early moves anyways. But the other thing was, so the jungler one is definitely a positive shift for me that we at least saw in plans. The other one was that I feel like Ardent Sensor is the other mandatory part of a team comp right now. However, a lot of playing games had teams that had no Ardent Sensor in them. And they were like Braum supports and stuff like that without an Ardent Sensor somewhere else. But then when I looked at that more closely, most of those teams were the second seeds or teams that didn't make it out of the groups or whatever. So a lot of the teams that were opting away from Ardent Sensor were actually losing. And I think that is actually going to change for the main group stage of Worlds, where I actually think that we'll almost see double Ardent Sensors, or one for each team in pretty much every game.
So I think there are some exceptions to that. Like I think that while that was true for most of the play-in stage, I think that Alistar can break that up. I think that with the Janna ban, Alistar can match up pretty well against a lot of the Ardent Sensor supports. If you want to play Lulu or something like that into a really strong player on Alistar with Ignite, like those sort of aggressive plays, I think can be made, and I think you can do that sort of trade. And one of the things that also I'm hoping for is that if you do have that sort of stuff, then you kind of get this like cycle of, if they get too greedy, you can punish them. And so you don't necessarily want to go as crazy with that, because the bot lane meta, one of the things that really was kind of interesting to me is also I started seeing a couple culls actually from AD carry starts, because people are getting so greedy that it's just like who can outgreed each other. It's kind of one of those things that I feel like when I'm playing mid lane and they take a barrier or something like that, well then you just want to take teleport or whatever because you're not going to be able to kill them anyway. So you just want to like one up them as far as the economy game. And I mean, if someone's gonna play a Janna with gold runes and a relic shield on the,
kill them.
You can either all in them, you go extreme the other way, or you can try to outgreed them, right?
That's about as greedy as you get, though, Janna with gold runes and a relic.
Okay, well, maybe there's not a relic shield.
You don't, but you don't have to go to the extreme.
Yeah.
You could just be a
but it
normal.
feels like people are doing that. It feels like more and more often you're seeing these gold runes and things like that on players because they are trying to literally just race to Ardent Sensor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to live in this world with you, Azale, where there,
Believe,
there are
Toby.
answers to
Hadn't
to,
killed
to
him.
the
Gonna
meta.
answer it.
But I've been talking to a lot of the players that are over like in boot
Yeah.
camps and stuff, and as far as the scrims and stuff are going for the teams at Worlds right now, they're like, yeah, you need an Ardent Sensor.
Yeah, I think
But
this is what's gonna
I'm right
happen.
there with you. I'm hoping for it.
Yeah, because I think what's going to happen is in most games, you're just going to do the Ardent Sensor with the greedy thing.
Yeah.
Against the really good aggressive bottom laners, like when you're playing Gorilla, you're going to ban Alistar and Thresh, and then you're going to do the greedy Ardent Sensor thing because there's not as much left to punish you. I think that's the direction we're going with that. But that doesn't mean the games are going to be super boring because of the diversity in the jungle, as well as how much like the mid lane's going to come down and try and kill all those squishy supports.
Also, I came up with another way to add diversity, and that would be, yes, we will take as a given that you need an Ardent Sensor, but you could use it somewhere else.
In the jungle.
In the jungle or even in the
mid.
top lane. I've seen a lot of, in high ELO, Korean solo queue, top lane karma.
Yep.
Huni has even been spamming top lane karma. If you can get Huni as a player to build an Ardent Sensor second item, play top lane karma, if Huni is doing it, then I feel like
Yeah.
that's gonna be a
This
thing.
this is a little bit of a tangent, and we'll touch this up in our group stage episode. I think there's a real chance that Immortals plays Anda in a game or two.
Just because he's smashing
just
solo
because of the
queue?
solo queue?
Yeah.
I think there's no chance.
Here's why.
Bet.
Yeah. It's a small chance, but if it happens, and this is the problem
I would
because
take that bet.
he's literally smashing with nothing but like Ardent Sensor, Athene's Nidalee,
Yeah.
and Jungle Ezreal. And when I look at Xmithy, he's playing the same champions, but not finding nearly the same level of success. So there's no question Anda's Nidalee is better than Xmithy's Nidalee
Yeah.
in those instances.
But-
and Ole doesn't want to play Sensor supports, but they'd also lose Xmithy, and he's never
It's
played
all
before.
coming
And
together.
I mean, it's Smithy has never been a solo queue guy, right? He's never been a guy who's like, oh yeah, do you see Smithy at the top of the solo queue? No, I saw him in Diamond 1. But then he was still smashing on stage. And to be fair, yes, I know he has been high at times, but that is not his reputation, right? He is
Yeah.
not like a Rush or like a Peanut or someone who you're like, oh yeah, you want to see the top solo queue thing? Check him out, right?
Or a Poe Belter.
yeah, or Pope.
Just saying it could happen, man.
It could happen.
There
but
we go.
But I
Boom.
think that
Nailed it.
there's so
agree.
much emphasis on
not betting.
his shot calling, on his leadership, on his experience. They talk so much this split about, oh my God, playing with Smithy is so good. He tells us what to do. He knows just what to do all the time. Oh, he's so calm. He's so great. I love Smithy.
Oh, but if only he could land the Nidalee spears, though. That's what they're going to say afterwards.
if maybe in some desperate world or something where they're getting absolutely slammed in the early games, then they try something. But
All right, gentlemen's bet.
Yeah,
It
and then
is
they
then.
ban Nidalee and Ezreal, and it's over.
the other thing is, there was, even though we did see some Nidalee and some Ezreal and whatnot, still 100% presence for Sejuani. Jarvan was 96% presence, never once built a warrior. And then next most common, Gragas.
Tanks, baby.
Right? It's still a lot of tanks, but we did get to see a fair bit of top lane flexibility. You know, we saw Fiora, we saw Trundle, we saw Jax, we saw Camille, we saw like a lot of different things coming out of the top lane. And I do think that while tanks can like, they're so much easier to play with, right? It's very, very easy to have a game plan where you can dive, and if you get ahead, you can push turrets, and they just make doing things a lot more easy. But I do think that a really well-played split push style can work in this meta, and I think that the fact that we saw Fiora come out, like, we could see the top laners, like guys like Huni who liked playing aggressive stuff, go for those styles,
What are you
right?
talking about, man? He's been playing Karma.
He's been playing Karma, but if people are going to keep playing Galio top, someone needs to smash that with Fiora or some sort of pick. Like, I actually think Galio top is so bad in lane now that a really well-played split push style champion can take over, especially a Fiora or a Trundle, things like this. Like, you can get to the point very easily if you're playing as well or better than the Galio, that the Galio cannot do anything.
I agree with the Fiora buffs back to pretty much her exact old state. We
Yeah.
definitely should be seeing some more.
Anyway, that does it for esports for this episode. But I do want to talk about patch 719, where personally I can rejoice about Ardent Sensor no longer healing people.
Oh,
It's been long enough.
such a far out there opinion, Jack.
Yeah. Oh man, so edgy.
Personally.
Everyone was loving that item. I actually loved Ardent Sensor for like 10 patches before other people did. and then I got bored of playing with it. And
He
then
was
I
the
hated
hipster art and
playing against
sensor
it.
player. He liked it before it was cool.
Yeah, I liked it before people realized
Which
it
was
cool.
actually true because I know you guys were
Then Art and
on the
Sensor-
Ivern train.
Art and
You guys
Sensor
were-
blew
you
up
guys
and
were like,
sold
"This
out.
Art and Sensor item, you gotta try it.
Became mainstream and was no
Yeah.
longer cool.
Yeah.
But a lot is actually in this patch. I feel like this is interesting because in past years, there's been a fairly disruptive Worlds patch, and then the live game stays pretty similar to what you're seeing at Worlds. Whereas this year, there was very low disruption leading up to Worlds, and I feel like a lot of the stuff that the design team wanted to get in, they dropped it now because they didn't want it to drastically shift Worlds. But like, there's big Azir changes. Xin Zhao's got his rework. Ardent Sensors finally hit. Janna, had a bunch of changes. What stood out to you, Isaac?
Well, I think that the Janna changes are pretty interesting because that's something that so many people have been talking about. People have been calling for Janna nerfs. People have been calling for Ardent Sensor nerfs. Yes, Ardent Sensor got clearly nerfed. It's just a worse item. But the Janna changes are actually just seem like a buff to me. I mean, the increased attack range, 75 more attack range, that is a really big one. That in combination with the passive changes. So Janna always gets her own tailwind passive, which gives her bonus move speed. And now her basic attacks and single target spells, aka your W and your autos, give you bonus magic damage equal to 35% of your bonus movement speed. That means you get the passive alone. That's getting 10 bonus magic damage by yourself just with your passive from your autos. So this is taking me back to a time when, before the Ardent Sensor area, where like Janna, you could go all AD reds, you go like all AD or AP blues, and you just shield yourself and just start autoing people with spell thieves. And you actually did a lot of auto attack damage with the extra auto attack range and a spell thief start. I feel like Janna could really heavily punish some lanes just through auto trading. Like that's a ton of bonus magic damage.
Yeah.
I think they were intending for it to be a buff in a playstyle shift, especially because of the Ardent Sensor nerf. So
Yeah, and I think they overdid it in this one. I believe they're going to nerf it back down almost immediately for this one because it's mostly buffs aside from the early shield cooldown, which then at level 9 goes back to normal. But it is meant to be that playstyle shift. I'll see how it plays out. Ban Janna if you're in solo queue right now and you're listening.
I
to
have
this
banned
episode.
Janna every
Or
single game
first
for
pick
so
it,
long.
because it's stronger now with these numbers for when the patch first released than it was last patch with Sensor.
and now you can use like MS Quints and stuff too,
Yep.
and like hit harder, and you're gonna be super fast. I feel like it would be fun to actually play support if you're in Janna right now.
Yeah, I mean the W cooldown's a lot lower too, so it's much more about trading. You could even do Thunderlords, probably Janna, and get away with it. Like from what I've
Here
been-
comes the fervor,
Yeah.
Janna. Ah!
Ardent Sensor, Ginsu's Rage Blade.
Hear me out, yeah. Rage Blade, Wits End, Janna ADC. Let's go.
W on hits.
One of the things that stood out to me, just because I've been spamming Rammus, was all his items got nerfed. I'm not necessarily sad about it because I like being forced to like shift to a new whatever I think is OP at the time.
Yeah,
And
because you were going.
I'm ready to be done with Rammus and move on.
Is Xin Zhao that
Um,
OP?
But I actually didn't read through all the Xin Zhao stuff. I want to talk about the Rammus stuff because Bramble Vest gets nerfed, which is actually going to affect a lot more people than just him because it was such a good, early, pretty cheap little investment into some Grievous Wounds.
Yeah, now it's 100 more gold. You're not getting anything extra for it at all.
It's worse actually.
And it's
100
worse.
more gold
Yeah.
for less damage reflected, no more armor.
It's 100% worse. Also, Righteous Glory got nerfed, and that was another item that's actually not just for Rammus. It's really good on quite a lot of jungle
Everyone.
champions. Good for pretty much any initiator, and I think those are going to actually impact the overall kind of landscape of the game right now, even more than just him. But I am going to shift more over towards the Ezreal and Nidalee now instead.
I really want Zeus Convergence to be good. Like, just for once. They're basically giving this item away at this point. They decrease the cost by 150 and then also made the slow burn easier to proc. So someone has to build this item now.
I actually hate when they do this and go too far. It feels like a lot of times they'll be like, nobody's buying my item. I feel really bad that no one's buying my item, so they just juice it up, right? Like you're saying, they want to almost get to the point where they're giving it away.
Yeah.
They have definitely gone very overboard with that in the past. I have literally never seen a Zeke's Convergence built, so I don't know if this is.
It was built in play, and Brahms were building it. You
Okay.
all converge.
Converged.
I
But
built on
yeah,
Blitzcrank a couple times.
anytime I see big shifts like that, I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, is this going to be another situation where they make it so efficient that you go from no one buying it to one person realizing, and then everyone's like, okay, it's just super busted now.
Yeah. Last thing I want to touch about in this patch is Veigar, because he also got an attack range buff, base health regen buff, health regen growth buff, and better scaling on his dark matter. So, Azael, tank Veigar.
Even more
It's
OP.
where it's at.
Yeah, exactly. You just scale it up. I mean, the W cooldown thing is actually pretty crazy. You're only ever gonna get a couple so every 100 stacks you get of a bonus AP, take another 10% cooldown off the W. So it could be pretty interesting to see some stuff where maybe people actually start doing W second instead of third, and maybe trying to get a really low cooldown. But I've heard that. I don't know if it's an actually achievable mark. I haven't actually tested myself, but people were saying that you can get to a point where you can get 2 Ws off in a cage stun. And if you can actually do that, and I don't know
Non-stop W's?
and I don't know if this is like I had 7,000 stacks in the practice tool,
Yeah,
and then I
that
could do
sounds
it.
like practice
But
tool.
if it is something like
I
that,
mean,
then
cooldown reduction is still capped. If you have 7,000 stacks, you're still gonna
no,
be
it's
capped.
not. It's not capped with
It's
this.
Oh,
It's
no,
additional.
dude.
Yeah.
So you go. So I.
It is multiplicative, though, so not additive. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like 10% off your 40% CDR.
Yeah, but see, you go the Storm Raiders, then you get 45% CDR, and then.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, if you can actually get to a point where it's realistic to have some sort of CC chain where you hit 2 Ws, because late game Ws you're like if you get hit by a W, you're just pretty much dead if you're not a tank. That would be pretty insane.
Just gonna
but-
be a meteor storm. It's just constantly having meteors falling from the sky.
Exactly,
Oh my
man.
god.
There's a lot of crazy changes, though. I mean, we don't have to go into all of them, but the Caitlyn changes are really big. I think Caitlyn essentially got rebuffed. They just are making the trap duration much, much shorter, but giving her back all her old power,
Right.
which I think brings her right back to pick ban. And one thing that I think has kind of sneakily maybe moved in there is Ornn. And I think that I've actually been seeing more players start to kind of succeed on Ornn a little bit here and there. And the fact that his mana cost actually got decreased even more and his base mana got increased, mana to me has been the thing that has actually been holding him back after the last round of buffs, because you just run out of mana, so your passive doesn't matter. You have to go back to base anyway. And with this latest round of changes, 40 more base mana, and the Q goes from 55 to 75 as you rank it up, to just 55 flat, and then your Searing Charge is just 10 mana off flat as well. Like, maybe you can actually lane, and then maybe you can get used to your passive, and then he becomes pretty damn good.
Yeah, I think he's much better in lane. I don't think it really changes his jungle that much at all.
No.
His jungle was fine. You build the jungle item, it gives you all the mana you want. But sure, maybe he could be a top laner now, because he can probably clear waves. Anything else you want to touch about 719 before we move on to future stuff, like first impressions on Runes or the Eve rework, which will come out far later?
Runes Reforged. Let's go.
Yeah, my thought on Runes Reforged, and I haven't dove into this super heavily. I don't think either of you guys have. If people are super interested, like the website allows you to play with literally every rune tree that they're going to have. I know Freaks released a few YouTube videos that go like pretty in depth on this stuff. To me, I see it being like Masteries Plus, and then you're getting rid of runes, because you're looking at current Masteries. It's like you have 3 trees with keystones at the end. Now you have 5 trees with keystones at the end. And that's generally the way the system works. So I'm just going to try and approach it personally like Masteries and just build the Mastery pages that way.
I mean, that's definitely what they're trying to do with the design. I would say that these are a lot more impactful. The choices are way more dynamic with these than the previous Masteries. Because there are a lot of things that you have to take into account. Because they're removing runes, you're removing a lot of these flat stats. Basically they're removing the choice between scaling stats and flat stats. Because that was pretty much the only choice with the previous rune system. You're either deciding, or at least for a jungle perspective here, like my only main choice was like, am I gonna go flat armor or scaling health yellows? And then you just shift up the other base stats that you're getting. So getting into the like dynamic decisions or whatever that you get to make with the new Masteries here, and I try to use Hecarim page as my like test subject. And I
Okay.
was like, oh god, look at all these movement things. It's gonna be so cool. I'm gonna get like this great Hecarim page. And I was kind of worried because Hecarim, early in the jungle before, like his early clear was not very good. You had to like for sure secure your blue buff, and you needed like some other defenses, right? So the
Mhm.
jungle didn't hit so hard. So I was like, all right, I have to keep that in mind, and I want as much speed as I can get. But some of the choices actually, a lot of the speed ones actually you can't get in combination with another speed one. And then some of them actually have their own cooldowns. Like the one where they show in the video, this Predator one, where you can activate it and you get this 45% increased speed.
Mhm.
It has a 3-minute cooldown, or at least it has it right now.
Yeah.
A lot of the stats I got are off of the test realm, which someone posted a whole table, by the way. If you want to look at actual hard
Mhm.
stats and
Mhm.
again theory crafting, those are all going to change. But that kind of took all the wind out of my sails, and I was like, all right, well, I give up on this. It's not that cool yet until I actually see the final numbers, like what they're
Exactly.
gonna actually release. It's um,
I built an Amumu page.
Yeah.
I will probably end up like tweeting out a link of it later for people that are interested. But like without the actual numbers, it's going to be super hard to do. What
Mhm.
I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Lolalytics afterwards and see what the high win rate things
Okay.
are, because that's how I've been using runes and masteries for the majority of the season. I actually find it to be pretty
real creative, Jack.
real creative, and then figure out what's good.
Yeah, I actually like doing that a lot as well, and I've done a number of like playtests trying out the new runes reforged, and I do think that certainly the intention is for all the masteries to feel more impactful. My only thing with it is that like while it's a lot more procs and it's supposed to be kind of more visceral things, a lot of it just
Mm.
really does equate to a stat bonus, right?
Mhm.
Every time I melee a champion or something like that, I get like a little mana buff that gives me some increased mana regeneration. That's not really necessarily different than just passive mana regeneration, right? And I think a lot of the stuff is shifted more towards proc, so it's like a little window of power and it feels more impactful. But I mean, talking about making a page, if I go to the tank page, Grasp the Undying is my
It's right away.
is what I'm going to pick right away, and then Font of Life is essentially Stoneborn Pact, right? It's a lot of
Mhm.
similar things, just kind of
Renamed and changed a little bit.
renamed, changed around. It's more in procs, like Iron Skin, gain 3 armor when you heal for at least 20 health from a thing, blah blah blah. This is just equating to like a percent armor buff that I would have had before.
I would say that they're creating windows though. So the things you're saying about it feeling more impactful because it's either a proc or because it's a choice, like you
Mhm.
use a summoner spell and then for however many seconds after the summoner spell you have this tenacity, because they're shifting it towards windows of power rather than always being on and always being flat. I think not only does it feel more impactful your choices, but that does affect your play style. So
Yeah.
this actually does change part of the way that I'm playing the game. And I wouldn't really want it to be so powerful. A lot of people were giving feedback that previously it was like your champion kit is like almost less powerful than your mastery choices.
Mhm.
And I think it's a
Mhm.
good choice to like tone it down so
Yep.
they're not as powerful as that. But I think that there are still these windows, which does change, a bit of how you play while not eclipsing the champion kit.
Yeah, when I talked to the designers at first, they wanted it to be power neutral to the current runes and mastery system.
Mm.
But the more you window the power, the more powerful it can be
Mm.
in those windows, which makes it feel more powerful without actually being more powerful, so to speak, like as far as actual gold values and stuff. So I think it's generally a healthy direction to go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I think that having it as windows of power increases the skill cap. So anytime there's an increase in skill caps like that, where you're making a choice, I feel like is a good direction.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
the same reason that Stoneborn Pact usually has higher win rates for the general population, but the pros are just going to go Courage of the Colossus because the window of power with Courage is so
Mhm.
much higher.
Yeah, my only thing was I felt like while the keystones have those big windows of power that you want to play around,
Mhm.
most of the other procs felt so small to me that it didn't end up really changing the way I played or the way that I wanted.
Mm.
But I am excited for it. I do think it's certainly an improvement over the current system. I think it's definitely a good thing. My only concern, and I haven't really dove into it enough to see with the current things, is if it can support like all builds as far as does it keep the play style, the general feeling of playing your characters all the same? Because one of the things that I had found kind of frustrating when playing it was not having attack speed on top laners. That's something that so many people are so used to having. When you do shifts like that, that can be sometimes tough to get used to. So that's something that I hope that it will get solved for.
Yeah, my other concern, like I was talking about with Hecarim, was like, oh, there's a lot of like flat armor and flat defenses, you know, from runes and the mastery. But you know, they're also rebalancing around these new masteries for the
Yeah.
jungle specifically. At
Yeah.
least
Yeah.
they're rebalancing. So yeah, we have to wait and see, I guess.
Exactly. Tons to wait and see. We're going to dive into that stuff down the road once we know more. For now, though, it's time for Twitter questions. Senior Justice, hashtag the dive lol. Should emerging region teams want to scrim established regions, and should established regions want to scrim emerging ones?
I think the emerging region teams should for sure want to scrim against the established regions. And for the established regions, I think being realistic, you probably only want to scrim them if you're going to play them, right? Because I think that you should always want to play against the best possible competition to try to get better, to try to learn and improve. And I think that that's something that's super beneficial to any team, whether it's NA scrimming Korea or it's CBLOL scrimming EU or whatever. If you're playing up, you can learn something from that, or you should be able to. But as far as playing an opponent, there's only so much you can get if you are really like a much better team. And that depends if you're fighting Gigabyte Marines or if you're fighting, someone who's maybe a much easier opponent than that. But if you're just slamming a team over and over and over, you only get so much from that. And you can actually, I think, reinforce bad habits because if everything is working, you don't really know if it's good or they just don't know how to respond to it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's kind of like the old question of should Korea scrim, non-Korean teams during like the world's boot camps and stuff. I think you should approach it like the same way, where you would have to kind of earn a spot, right?
Yeah.
You would have to prove that there's something that they're going to get out of it. If SKT is going to take you as a scrim partner, maybe you showed some really innovative strategy or something early on in the tournament or something like that, and they want to like get a chance to play against that, or there's got to be some value for both parties.
Exactly, because the teams that are good get all the choice. People always want to scrim people better than them so they can hope to catch up to them. So the best teams, I think they should actually want to scrim emerging ones very sparingly. Like, check if someone else says they're good, kind of check how they're playing, because they're going to kind of give you their best shot. Don't give your best shot. Just learn about them and then use your best shot on the other like good scrim partners is the way I see it. Next question, Glenn Alistair says, why aren't we seeing more Lysandra? She has favorable matchups, I think, into Lucian, LeBlanc, and Ryze. Great team fighter, etc.
I think it's one of those things where sometimes pros are slow to change. They like what they've been playing. They stick to what they're playing. And a lot of pros even will admit that unless someone else shows that it's good first, they're not going to bother spending their time on it because they want to be, as they see it, super, super, super efficient with their practice time, only practice what they're for sure going to play. I do think that there is room for Lysandra in any meta where LeBlanc is really popular because I think that Lysandra is a fantastic answer to LeBlanc. I also think that likewise it works well against some of the split pushy style top lane champions because I think that you can lock them down and shut them down.
Yeah, I agree that those matchups work, but I don't think it fits in the current overall meta because if you're not completely bursting the AD carry who has an Ardent Sensor Shield with your Lysandra engage, you are useless. You'll come out of your stasis. Tristan is going to be half health because the shield ruined your burst, and you just lost the fight. Rather than the sustained damage you're going to be able to get from a Cassiopeia, Syndra, any of those other champs.
But I mean, LeBlanc, to be fair, doesn't really offer that sort of damage either, right? LeBlanc is kind of a similar damage profile, so I think as a counter matchup, it could work.
She can poke, get the shields out, and then get out.
That's fair, yeah.
Yeah, I do like the point that you brought up though about it being a good matchup into specific super meta champions like Lucian. Literally just looking on the solo queue win rates here. Her win rate against Lucian is actually insane, like 57%. Like it looks like a super favorable matchup. Now the thing with taking solo queue win rates and applying them to pro play is that those matchups can be played very differently by pro players, and even we have to like constantly talk to pro players and like asking them on Twitter, like, does this matchup actually play out X way, at the highest level of play? Because sometimes it doesn't. But maybe he should forward this tip to his favorite team and see if they can get like a secret counter here, because it looks like for the majority of people that's working.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think it's true. It's a good point about the pro play stuff because I do think even if it's a super, super good matchup, sometimes pro players are just willing to play it so much more passively than someone will in solo queue. Whereas, if you're playing Lucian and Lissandra in solo queue, you're probably like, maybe I could outplay him, right? Maybe I could do something. Whereas the pro player may just sit under their turret and accept that they're down 20 CS and be more useful later.
Also, Jad's point about team play, like team
Yeah.
play and pro play is so much different. You have to worry about the later stages of the game too.
All right, thank you for the question, Glenn. That is going to do it for this episode of The Dive. This is our second to last episode before we're going on the road to China for Worlds. So we're going to lose this set after the next episode. Keep in mind, we're going to have special guests on the show. It's going to be audio only all throughout Worlds. Next week, we'll be releasing our group dive guide. It's going to be on Tuesday, so be sure to keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, and keep sending us the Twitter questions. We're trying to get as many as possible, even while we're on the road. And even though it's audio only, it still should be on YouTube. So
Yes.
you guys should be able to get it in the same place that you get it every time. You just can't see our beautiful faces. And also, the play-in knock-in stage begins at 8 p.m. Pacific time. It's earlier, 2 hours earlier than normal if you're used to watching the play-ins, as Cloud9 takes on Lyon Gaming. And then Fnatic is going to be playing up against HKA right
Nailed
after that.
The knock-in stage, I like it.
The knock-in.
Knock 'em into
You knock
groups.
yourself into the tournament instead of knocking your opponents out, Kobe.
I like
Yeah,
the
it's
perspective.
perfect. Great job.
Glass half full.